Your sexual desire did not appear randomly. It did not begin with hormones. It did not start with attraction. It began much earlier, when you were powerless, watching, absorbing, adapting. Carl Jung believed that nothing intense in adulthood comes from nowhere, especially not desire, especially not what pulls you compulsively, silently, irrationally. As a child, you did not choose your environment. You learned how to survive it. And survival leaves patterns. If love was inconsistent, desire learned to chase. If affection was conditional, desire learned to perform. If warmth came with tension, desire learned confusion. If closeness felt unsafe, desire learned distance. Sex later becomes the language your nervous system already knows. Not because you are broken, but because your psyche repeats what it understands. Jung explained that the unconscious does not think in morals. It thinks in memory. It repeats emotional experiences until they are made conscious. This is why people feel drawn to situations they intellectually hate. This is why desire can feel shameful, obsessive, contradictory. This is why arousal can coexist with fear, guilt, or emptiness. Your body remembers before your mind explains. As a child, you learned what connection felt like, not what it was supposed to be, but what it actually was. Maybe attention came only when you behaved a certain way. Maybe love required silence. Maybe closeness meant emotional labor. Maybe chaos felt normal. Your psyche stored that as intimacy. Later, sexual desire becomes the fastest shortcut back to that emotional familiarity. Not because it heals you, but because it feels recognizable. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat. The unconscious attempt to resolve unfinished emotional experiences. You are not chasing pleasure. You are chasing completion. This is why some people feel most aroused by what hurts them. Why intensity feels erotic. Why calm feels boring. Why healthy intimacy feels unfamiliar. Your nervous system equates familiarity with safety, even when familiarity was unsafe. As a child, you adapted by becoming something. Maybe you became agreeable, maybe invisible, maybe hyper-aware, maybe emotionally mature too early. That adaptation becomes identity, and identity shapes desire. Desire does not aim for what is good. It aims for what matches your inner map. Jung warned that when childhood patterns remain unconscious, they do not disappear. They express themselves symbolically. Sex becomes one of the strongest symbols. Not because sex is dirty, but because it is intimate, charged, vulnerable. It bypasses logic. This is why you can want someone who mirrors your wound. Why desire feels automatic. Why you feel pulled before you think. Your shadow is not immoral. It is unintegrated memory. The shadow holds what you had to suppress to belong, to survive, to be loved. If emotional needs were ignored, the shadow learned hunger. If boundaries were crossed, the shadow learned confusion. If love was inconsistent, the shadow learned longing. Sex becomes the stage where these unresolved energies act out, not consciously, not deliberately, but repeatedly. This is also why shame follows desire for many people. Shame is not about sex itself. It is about the old self who learned to want quietly, to need without asking, to accept crumbs as intimacy. Your adult desire is not immature. It is unfinished. And what is unfinished always demands expression. Jung believed healing begins the moment you stop judging desire and start listening to what it is pointing toward. Because desire is not random, it is symbolic. And until you understand the symbol, it will keep returning, stronger, louder, more confusing. When childhood patterns remain unconscious, they do not fade with age. They refine themselves. They become more subtle, more intelligent, more seductive. This is where sexual desire stops being simple attraction and becomes a psychological loop. As a child, you learned how closeness worked, not through words, through tone, timing, absence, tension. If affection came unpredictably, your nervous system learned to stay alert. Alertness later feels like excitement. If love came with emotional distance, your psyche learned to pursue what retreats. Distance later feels magnetic. If care required you to overgive, your desire learned to earn closeness. Effort later feels erotic. This is how attachment styles turn into sexual patterns. Not consciously, not deliberately, but reliably. People often believe they are attracted to a type, but they are actually responding to a familiar emotional climate. Your desire does not ask, "Is this healthy?" It asks, "Does this feel like home?" This is why some people feel bored with kindness, why consistency feels dull, why chaos feels alive. The body confuses intensity with intimacy because intensity was once required to receive attention. In childhood, you may have learned to scan moods, to read micro-expressions, to adjust yourself emotionally. That hyper-attunement later becomes sexual sensitivity. You feel deeply. You bond quickly. You lose yourself easily. Not because you are weak, but because you were trained to connect this way. Others learned the opposite. If closeness felt overwhelming or invasive, desire learned distance. Desire learned control. Desire learned detachment. Sex becomes safe only when emotions stay muted. Pleasure without vulnerability. Intensity without intimacy. This is not avoidance. It is protection. The psyche always protects first. Jung explained that when a core emotional need is unmet, it does not disappear. It disguises itself. Desire becomes a disguise. You may crave validation, but feel it as lust. You may crave safety, but feel it as obsession. You may crave connection, but feel it as attraction to unavailable people. This is why desire can feel compulsive. It is not about pleasure. It is about regulation. Your nervous system is trying to stabilize itself using the tools it learned early. This creates repetition loops. You meet someone. They trigger the old emotional pattern. Your body responds before your mind does. Desire ignites. You feel pulled, excited, alive. Then the familiar pain returns. Distance, confusion, overgiving, shame. The cycle repeats. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because the psyche believes this is how closeness works. Until the pattern is seen, desire keeps reenacting it. This is also why sexual fantasies often surprise people. They are symbolic, not literal. The fantasy is not about the act. It is about the emotional position. Power, submission, being chosen, being seen, being consumed, being in control. These are not perversions. They are metaphors. They reveal where your childhood self adapted. A child who felt powerless may fantasize about control. A child who felt invisible may fantasize about being desired intensely. A child who felt responsible may fantasize about surrender. Desire speaks in images because the unconscious does not use language. It uses symbols. And when those symbols are ignored, they grow louder. Shame enters when desire clashes with your conscious identity. You think, why do I want this? What is wrong with me? Why can't I change? The conflict creates self-judgment, but judgment never dissolves a pattern. Awareness does. Jung warned that what we repress does not disappear. It acts autonomously. This is why suppressing sexual desire often strengthens it. You are not meant to kill desire. You are meant to understand it. Because desire is not your enemy. It is your messenger. And until you understand what it is asking for, it will keep choosing for you. Integration does not begin by changing behavior. It begins by changing relationship. Carl Jung believed that freedom comes not when instincts are eliminated, but when they are made conscious. Your sexual desire does not need discipline first. It needs differentiation. The problem was never desire itself. The problem was that childhood memory was driving adult choice. As long as the child self is in control, desire feels urgent, compulsive, overpowering. Not because it is strong, but because it is old. The psyche repeats what was unfinished until someone finally stays present with it. This is where most people fail. They try to fix desire. They try to moralize it. They try to suppress it. They try to replace it. But Jung warned that suppression only forces the shadow underground, where it gains autonomy. Integration means bringing desire out of the shadow and into awareness, not to act it out, not to indulge it blindly, but to understand its origin. Ask a different question. Not, why do I want this? But what part of me learned to want this? When desire arises, pause. Not to resist, but to observe. What emotion comes first? Is it loneliness, tension, restlessness, invisibility, powerlessness. Desire rarely appears alone. It rides on another feeling. That feeling is the doorway. When you trace desire backward, you do not find sex. You find a younger self trying to regulate something unmet. This is where separation happens. You realize this urge belongs to a memory, not a mandate. Awareness breaks identification. You are no longer inside desire. You are in relationship with it. Jung called this ego differentiation, the moment the conscious self stops being possessed by unconscious material. Desire loses its urgency the moment it is seen clearly. Not immediately, but gradually. Because repetition requires blindness. Once you see the pattern, your nervous system begins to learn a new association. Safety no longer requires intensity. Closeness no longer requires performance. Arousal no longer requires chaos. This is not forced rewiring. It is earned trust. Your body learns through experience, not logic. You begin choosing slowly, feeling fully, stopping when something feels familiar instead of true. This is where desire changes texture. It becomes quieter, more grounded, less urgent, more selective. Not weaker, cleaner. You stop chasing what feels intense and start responding to what feels present. This is often mistaken for boredom, but it is not boredom. It is unfamiliar peace. The old pattern fed adrenaline. The new one feeds connection. Jung wrote that individuation is the process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you had to be. Sexual desire matures when it is no longer used to regulate old wounds. It becomes expression, not compensation. This is why healed desire feels different. It does not rush. It does not beg. It does not panic. It waits. It responds. It chooses. And this is the final truth most people never hear. You do not lose desire when you heal. You lose compulsive desire. What remains is intimacy without hunger, attraction without fear, connection without self-betrayal. Your childhood shaped your desire, but it does not get to decide your future. Once you see the pattern, you are no longer inside it. And from that moment on, every choice becomes conscious. If this helped you see yourself more clearly, leave a comment with what line hit you hardest. Like the video if it resonated. Subscribe if you want deeper Jungian psychology without dilution. And ask yourself one final question tonight. Is this desire coming from who I was or who I am becoming?